When it comes to mindfulness, sometimes some of the most challenging aspects of that is feeling like you're stuck in this whirlpool of maybe negativity, or having all of this information blasted to you that keeps you in that negative mindset. But there is a way that our brains work that can help us, that we can kind of hijack in a way and help ourselves find a different way out. So Dr. Donald Hebb, he stated in his work, neurons that fire together wire together. So what that means is when you're building new neural pathways, it's like you're wearing out a walking track. So the more you use that walking track, the more that track gets paved along the way. And the less you use it, the more the overgrowth comes back in. So the prefrontal cortex of the brain sits at the front, controls attention and decision making. So this is where the truth behind the saying of where attention goes, energy flows comes from, because when our attention is on something, we are more likely to make decisions that then support that as truth, whether it is the truth or not. And when you consider that our brains have a negativity bias, and that's a survival mechanism, like it's a throwback, but it's a survival mechanism because we need, in times past, we needed to remember that there might be predators around. So we needed to have that negativity bias in history in order to survive. But when our brains have that inherent negativity bias, and when our attention is going, and that's where the energy is flowing, it can strengthen those neurons. But the benefit of having a fully developed prefrontal cortex, especially as adults, especially beyond the age of somewhere in your 20s, I think it's about 25, we get to choose which neurons we strengthen. There are a few challenges that come to that. So studies have shown it's harder to flip a negative thought to a positive. So the example of, if you hear that a procedure has a 70% success rate, you're more likely to feel positively about it. But on the flip side, it's still the truth, but if you hear it in the wording of it has a 30% failure rate, you are definitely going to feel negative, even once you hear the then flip side. So if you hear the 30% failure rate first, and then hear the 70% success rate after, it's still more challenging because our brains are already hardwired into that negativity bias, which means that that neural pathway is already really well worn. But it's not impossible. It takes a bit of work and effort to start to practice to change it, because it is so well worn, but it's not impossible. It's where you can make the decision from that part of your brain to have your attention go to a place that starts to help you out instead. And the more you practice, the easier and more positive your decisions can become, because you're building that new walking track, that new neural pathway. So what that means is it's not easy. Sometimes if you're stuck in that negative loop, I get it, it's definitely not easy. But we will do better for the decisions that we make in our lives by practicing stepping out of the negativity bias and practicing in stepping into that positivity bias. And it doesn't have to mean that you are being unrealistic. It doesn't have to mean that you feel positive all the time, but what that practice does then helps your brain to default a little more easily to that new neural pathway of then being able to see the evidence that supports it to be right, that things can go well, or that things can be good. And what happens when our brains do that is that they start to see the opportunities where it can go better or well or can be good. So it starts to identify more things. It's like the practice of gratitude. So whether it's a gratitude journal, or where you just sort of state something, or 3 things or 5 things, or whatever the practice is that you are grateful for today, what that does is it helps to then teach the brain how to more easily identify those things that it can be grateful for ongoing. So it becomes more of that habit. So then it's easy to see more things that you can feel grateful for, so then you can cultivate more gratitude and more of that sense of fulfillment. So it all kind of loops into one. It's goes both ways. It's not one thing and then the other, but we can definitely take the steps to support it, and over time it becomes easier. The trick with this, like most things ever in anything, is not perfection but more consistency and practice. So if you think about the things that you've shown up for in relationships, in your own work, in your own goals, you might notice that it's consistency that makes all the difference into how they go, how those things go, or how they're responded to, rather than being perfect. So this is just another one of those things. It's teaching your brain that yes, there might be a negative side of things, or a way to frame it as negative, but there is always a way to frame things as positive, and it doesn't take away from the realistic aspect of it, but it does help you to see and identify more of maybe the opportunities, or more of the things to be grateful for, or things that you can do with that, rather than necessarily feeling as stuck all the time. So a really practical way of doing this is changing the word, or changing your use of the word busy. So I've used it lately, but I don't use it as a glorification. Sometimes we glorify being busy. Sometimes we get stuck in that loop, and we just get stuck in that, oh, I'm so busy, and it feels heavy and like it's weighing us down. A way you can change that, until you change your relationship with what that word means and feels to you, if you change it at all, but a way you can change the use of that word is to say, oh, my day is really full, rather than my day is really busy, because busy has that element of franticness to it. It has that element of pressure, like there's like a vice or a squeeze that's happening. Whereas if you say, my day is really full, it's this sense of, my day is full, but there's this filling up, and some of it can be fulfilling. And even if it's busy, even if it is busy rather than things that are particularly fulfilling, there is this element of just changing your relationship with the things in your day. And then you can see a different perspective. And then maybe you get to more consciously choose which things go into your day, because it's full. So you get to be more conscious about what you fill up your time with, rather than feeling a victim of being busy. So there's a lot in that, but they're all kind of about helping ourselves help ourselves. So just remember that where your attention goes is usually where your decisions go. Your decisions in how you are going to view things, or your habits around what languaging you use. And none of this is small things that will change immediately or shift immediately. But again, if nothing else, remember that consistency and just attempting to show up is way, way more powerful and fulfilling for everyone involved than perfection ever will be.